Old Hollywood was full of stars and glistening glamour, but behind the curtain, one man controlled the spotlight. Hi everyone, Ken here. Today we're exploring the many mansions of William Randolph Hearst and his mistress, Marion Davies. Hit that subscribe button and let's explore this house. William Randolph Hearst was born into privilege, but it was his ambition and audacity that truly set him apart. From his early days in San Francisco, where his father's mining fortunes provided a life of luxury, Hearst was destined for greatness, or at least for infamy. But greatness, as it turned out, was a double-edged sword. Hearst's early life was one of contrast, wealth and rebellion, privilege and restlessness. At Harvard, he was more known for his extravagant pranks than for his academic prowess. When he was expelled, it wasn't a surprise, rather, it was the first sign of the maverick spirit that would define his career. In 1887, Hearst took control of the San Francisco Examiner, a newspaper his father had acquired on a whim. It was here that he found his calling. With a flair of sensationalism and a nose for scandal, Hearst transformed the paper into a force to be reckoned with. But the Examiner was just the beginning. Hearst had a vision to create a media empire that would span the nation, influencing public opinion and shaping history. Meanwhile, his mother Phoebe had purchased a beautiful tract of wilderness in Pleasanton, California, and intended to build a home for orphans. But after her husband, William's father, passed away, she decided to take some time for herself, leaving her son with a hefty allowance to do as he pleased. Hearst had heard about his mother's plans to build an orphanage and decided to visit the property in Pleasanton, falling in love with the natural beauty of the landscape. Without his mother's permission, nor her consent, he hired architect A.C. Schweinfurth to design him a mansion in place of the planned orphanage. The 53-room hacienda drew inspiration from various architectural styles, including the Moorish, Pueblo, and Mission styles. 4 years into the construction of the mansion, Phoebe decided to visit Pleasanton to get started on the orphanage, only to discover that her son had desecrated the land and had selfishly built for himself on land devoted to vulnerable children. She was furious. She banned William from the property, not allowing him to live in the home he had built for himself, using her money. She never forgave him either. As punishment, William would not receive enough money to build a dream house until it was willed to him upon Phoebe's death. Phoebe hired her favorite architect, Julia Morgan, to try to make sense of the architectural nightmare her son had created. Through a series of renovations and expansions, Julia was able to transform the jumbled maze of a house into a more cohesive mansion. Phoebe was able to make it her own. With an artistic flair, she displayed Navajo baskets in the rafters with 16th century European tapestries. The strange configuration and styling of the home gave her a chance to experiment with various styles and furniture arrangements. The drawing room was just as eclectic in its own right, with damask wallpaper set below exposed beams and European, Asian, and Native American art sharing the same walls. The entire house became a collector's paradise. Even the library was filled with antiques from every inhabited continent, with custom chandeliers strung from beads and seashells, and with fireplaces covered over by tropical plants. Guests sometimes referred to this room as the hall because of the lack of books, questioning whether it could actually be called a library. The dining room was a more intimate space with a more cohesive European style, though there were some oddities, including a fabric chandelier hung over the center of the table and curtains hung between rooms instead of pocket doors. Phoebe's bedroom would fit right in with the current boho trends of today, with dark walls covered in clustered picture frames, ornate furniture from each continent, and assorted knickknacks all set above a Persian rug. Her style was uniquely her own for the time period. She entertained, threw huge parties, and thoroughly enjoyed the property while fulfilling her philanthropic dreams, donating huge sums of money into education. She passed away in her hacienda in 1919, leaving only $10 million, or the modern-day equivalent of about $181 million to her son, who immediately sold the hacienda. But that is getting way ahead in our story. As Hearst's empire grew, so did his influence. He moved to New York City, where he bought the New York Journal and engaged in a bitter circulation war with Joseph Pulitzer's New York World. This was the era of yellow journalism, and Hearst was its master. Crime, corruption, scandal, nothing was off limits. Hearst knew what the public wanted, and he gave it to them in spades. At this point, he began making his own money, eclipsing his father's fortune. He purchased the top 3 floors of the Clarendon, but quickly ran out of space, expanding to 5 floors and later calling the entire building his own home. Entering the apartment, we pass through the reception room with antiques glowing under the multicolored light of a massive stained glass window. This feeds us into the Gothic banquet hall, lined with suits of armor standing guard of antique European tapestries. The South Library almost catches us off guard, as we might expect a man of such grandeur to boast a massive collection of books. Then we turn the corner, and there it is, the main library lined with stacks containing thousands of leather-bound books. And at the very end, a mantel salvaged from a castle stands against oak paneling. But there was more to Hearst than his newspapers and lavish lifestyle. He was a man of contradictions, a populist who believed in opulence, a nationalist who admired European culture, and a public figure who fiercely guarded his private life. His relationship with Marion Davies, a vivacious actress 34 years his junior, was a testament to these contradictions. In 1897, the star who would become Marion Davies was born Marion Davies. She was the daughter of a New York lawyer and grew up in a strict household. By the time she was school-age, she had been sent off to live in a religious convent, far, far away from any distraction. Regardless of her parents' efforts to keep her on the straight and narrow, she had ambitious dreams of becoming famous. She ran away from the convent and changed her last name to become a chorus girl, and as a teenager saw her star role in a Broadway musical. In 1916, at the age of only 19 years old, she caught the eye of Hearst, who was 54 at the time. The eccentric media mogul fell madly in love with the young star. He attended her shows every night for 8 weeks straight, sitting in the front row and sending her gifts backstage. Even though Hearst was married, he had to have Marion, but not just for love, he wanted her talent. From this point on, Marion would become Hearst's mistress for the rest of his life. He moved her into a palatial mansion in Manhattan along Riverside Drive and bought her a country house on Long Island to carry on their affair, but his meddling did not stop there. Hearst seized Davies' career, founding Cosmopolitan Pictures to create more roles for her on the silver screen. He hired paparazzi to follow her around and write about her day-to-day activities for his newspapers, and bought up billboards to plaster her face around Times Square. By 1924, she had become the #1 female star in the box office, and in just a few short years, she had gone from a runaway church girl to the biggest star in Hollywood. While Mrs. Hearst stayed behind in New York, William and Marion lived openly together in California between Hearst's many mansions. Inheriting a vast fortune in 1919, including land in San Simeon, California, Hearst commissioned Julia Morgan to create something a little more comfortable than his family's previous campsite on the same lot. What followed was a collaboration spanning nearly 3 decades, resulting in a sprawling estate that is as much a museum as it is a residence. The castle's grandeur is matched only by the history that unfolded within its walls. During its heyday in the 1920s and 1930s, Hearst Castle was a playground for Hollywood's elite and political luminaries alike. The guest list read like a who's who of the era. Charlie Chaplin, Cary Grant, Winston Churchill, and Calvin Coolidge, among many others, all found themselves captivated by the castle's allure. Guests were treated to lavish dinners in the Grand Refectory, screenings of the latest films in the private theater, and the unparalleled luxury of the estate's many pools and guest houses. In the same year in which work started on Hearst Castle, his mother Phoebe passed away, leaving the estate Wyntoon to her niece. The original idea was to have a castle in McCloud, California, harmoniously blending into its natural surrounding, prompting Phoebe to hire 2 architects to realize her vision, Julia Morgan and Bernard Maybach, who worked in tandem, drawing inspiration from the nearby conifer trees, covering the house with shingles to exaggerate its height with long vertical elements. It sat right in the bend of the river, with trickling water echoing from its blue volcanic stone. The interior of the home boasted exposed timber beams, Gothic arches, and massive stone fireplaces. It was accented by Flemish tapestries hung on the walls, as we can see here in the assembly room. The dining room was more rustic, with exposed stone walls set below timber crossbeams, and the floors were finished out with oversized wood planks. The walls were decorated with tapestries, trophies, and artifacts from the native Wyntoon tribe who once lived on the land and became the namesake of the estate. In 1919, Phoebe passed away from the Spanish flu while visiting her hacienda. She left Wyntoon to her niece, Anne Flint. This enraged Hearst, who tried to buy it from Anne, but she refused to sell. Hearst attempted withholding artwork from her, but she still would not sell. Finally, Hearst tasked an entire team of lawyers with taking the estate from Anne, which they did in 1925. She received $198,000 as compensation, or the modern-day equivalent of about $3.5 million. In hindsight, this was actually really good for Anne because the castle and all of its contents were lost to fire in 1929. Without a house on the scenic property, William began planning a 61-bedroom castle to take its place, but the Great Depression was just starting and the man with a seemingly endless fortune had to cut back on spending. He hired Julia Morgan once again to come back to the site and reimagine the land without a castle. He sent her to Germany to research architecture for 1 year, and when she came back, she proposed a Bavarian-style village consisting of 4 homes following the river bend. They would all be arranged in a semicircle around a central foundation with a lawn growing between the conifers. In 1934, the village was completed. One of the houses on this estate was the half-timbered brown bear house, which was covered in colorful murals between the timbers. Walking inside, the door was ornately carved with pointed arches receding in layers above it, all set below hand-carved beams. The staircase rounded out along the wood-paneled walls, leading to a bay window at its landing. This statuary decorated the newel post with niches set in the room's corners for displaying larger statues. On the other side of the circular drive was the Cinderella house, containing a clock in its central gable with bay windows transitioning into pointed towers as they rose from the second to third floors. The Cinderella house was also decorated with murals between its timbering depicting fairy tales, as we can see Cinderella below the clock racing to her carriage while wearing just one glass slipper. The outbuildings on the property included the senior staff Swiss chalet and a river house which had been built with a cantilevered deck above the river. The bridge house, an homage to Phoebe's original home, was covered in shingles and set on the opposite side of the river. The smallest house was known as the Nerve Center, where telegraphs and telephone calls could be received by 3 full-time staff members. While both Wyntoon and Hearst Castle were being built, he went on a buying spree, purchasing St. Donat's Castle in South Wales as a gift for Marion Davies. Then he headed over to Long Island to purchase Beacon Towers, the former summer home of Alva Belmont Vanderbilt. But for as grand as these residences were, they would not compare to his next gift. He hired none other than Julia Morgan to design a sprawling 110-room party house for his lover on Santa Monica Beach. With 55 bathrooms, guest wings, and several dog kennels, her oceanfront pad became the center of the social scene during the Jazz Age. Marion had a love for historic styles and collaborated closely with Morgan, making sure her home reflected the best of the past. Walking inside, you would be greeted by a grand hall with 2 staircases mirroring each other behind fluted columns, turning at their landings to converge on the 3rd floor with large windows overlooking the surf as each sunset flooded the stair hall with golden light. Her library was finished out with wood paneling, concealing built-in bookcases along with overstuffed furniture mirroring the patterns found in the ceiling's ornate plasterwork. Her parlors were gilded with gold accents, delicately placed on wood-paneled walls above a chevron floor holding enough antique chairs to ensure every guest had a place to rest. Her parties would spill out onto the beach, with hundreds of guests being catered to by a permanent staff of 32 people. Regularly entertaining such large crowds required a remarkable amount of space for servants. She had several kitchens and pantries in each wing of the house, such as this one where we can see her fine collection of china behind glass cabinets. But the feasts were primarily prepared here under the direction of her private chef, using state-of-the-art appliances in a room that Marion probably never set foot in. Despite such lavish amenities, the dining room was meant to be a more intimate space for entertaining only a handful of close friends. Perhaps the most famous event to ever happen at her house was when Hearst rented a carousel from Warner Brothers. When it arrived at the house, it did not fit where it had been planned to be placed, so Hearst instructed that several walls of the house be removed, offering to have them rebuilt after the party. Hearst continued purchasing grand estates, including this one, which was dismantled and moved in the Bay Area to make way for another Julia Morgan creation known as the Western White House. But in his later years, he became less obsessed with the things money could buy. As time went on, Hearst attempted to divorce his wife so he could marry Davies, but his wife would not allow it. The two came to an agreement for the affair to carry on, and so it did. Hearst became increasingly more possessive of Marion, even though she occasionally had romantic relationships with other stars, such as Charlie Chaplin. His jealousy became so intense that he would rewrite portions of her films so that she would never have any kissing scenes nor loving embraces. This left Marion furious because he was now holding her back, but she loved him and ended up not fighting him on such issues. She once wrote to her close friend, Lita Gray, Charlie Chaplin's second wife, "God, I'd give everything to marry that silly old man. Not for the money and security. He's given me more than I'll ever need. Not because he's such cozy company either. Most times, when he starts jawing, he bores me stiff. And certainly, not because he's so wonderful behind the barn. Why, I could find a million better lays any Wednesday. No, you know what he gives me, sugar? He gives me the feeling I'm worth something to him. A whole lot of what we have, or don't have, I don't like. He's got a wife who will never give him a divorce. She knows about me, but it's still understood that when she decides to go to the ranch for a week or a weekend, I've got to vamoose. And he snores, and he can be petty, and he has sons about as old as me, but he's kind, and he's good to me, and I'd never walk out on him." They never did get married, and by the time Marion was in her 40s, she had retired from the silver screen to spend her time taking care of Hearst and providing him with companionship. In 1945, she sold her beach house for $500,000 just to get rid of it, though that value alone was less than what she had paid for the imported fireplaces and antique wall panelings which decorated the rooms. When Hearst died in 1951, he left her a controlling stake in his company. But she did not accept her inheritance. She approached Hearst's widow and offered to sell her the millions of dollars worth of shares for just $1. After Hearst's death, Marion felt lonely, having lost the love of her life while she still had so much more life to live. She developed a terrible drinking habit, almost never having a sober moment. This drove many of her friends away. On a wild night, 11 weeks after losing her lover, she eloped with a sea captain named Horace Brown in Las Vegas. She filed for divorce several times, but Horace refused to sign the papers. This was a major wake-up call for her, and she began to look for purpose again. Her youth had escaped her, and she couldn't return to the spotlight, so she went into real estate development, building hotels and office buildings from coast to coast, increasing her fortune far beyond what she ever made as a movie star or side chick. And unlike the man she had fallen in love with, the one who stole money from an orphanage to build a mansion, the one who sued his own family for a property he maybe visited 3 times, the one who hoarded buildings coast to coast with antiques, the only thing she wanted was to make other people's lives better. The more money she had, the more she donated to charity, especially children's hospitals. All this time, Marion had never put down the bottle, drinking in excess every night until she had a stroke in 1956. She was never the same after the stroke, and many of her old friends claimed the Marion they knew was no longer to be found in her drifting gaze. From here, her health began to take a steep decline. 3 years later, she was diagnosed with cancer and began to wither away. In 1961, she had an emergency operation to remove her bone cancer in an attempt to save her life, but her now frail body couldn't recover, and she died just a few months later in September of 1961. Though she had made an attempt to give away all of her money before she had a stroke, she ended up leaving over $20 million, or the modern-day equivalent of about $210 million, to the sea captain she married while drunk in Vegas. The beach house, which saw the biggest parties of Hollywood's golden age, was used as a hotel for a short while, but with changing times meant changing fashions, and the house was demolished for a newer building to take its place. Of all the houses they built together, the only ones lost to time were Oceanside, the Hacienda, and Beacon Towers. All of the rest continue to stand, either as museums or private residences and apartments. His architectural legacy aside, Hearst's story is a complicated one. He was a man who shaped American media, but also a man whose personal life was as sensational as the stories he printed. His relationship with Marion Davies, often misunderstood and misrepresented, was one of the very few constants in his tumultuous life. Together they weathered the storms of scandal, financial ruin in the Great Depression, and public scrutiny. And when Hearst died in 1951, it was Davies who mourned him the most, and even though they bought everything they could ever want, there were never enough treasures in the world to replace the love they had together. But I'll pass it off to you. What are your thoughts on their story? Did any of their mansions stick out to you? Let me know down below in the comments section. I would also like to take a moment to say a huge thank you to my This House supporters for making videos like this one possible. If you would like to show your support for my research and video production, join the membership program today and gain access to exclusive, restored footage and community posts published multiple times every week. As always, thank you all for watching, and make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an exciting episode of This House.